First, thank you very much for making yourselves available on a short term like this. What was driving that decision is that will become more apparent as we talk about things, but also there was a desire on the part of Director Pearson and myself to be able to move the assignment and acceptance of this shared ad hoc committee out to the board as soon as we could. What I'd like to do is take a few minutes at the beginning here to kind of give some background about why this evolved and what the expectations are and what the intent is that lies behind looking at something in this kind of formation. As you, I'm sure, are well aware, the IGA has a process whereby in going forward, they do design work up to the point of having a 30% design. And at that point, we as an organization, the district, need to make very specific choices about what items within the listing of the ECMs that we would like to have PG&E take further and to go ahead and do as a project and get launched. That requires on our part also to have something decided upon relative to the financing for that, whether it's by grant or matching funds on a grant or by loans. Part of that process normally would be what we've set up with our committees to have the R&I committee go through a lot of the review of the CIP and prioritizations and those kinds of things, as well as then passing off their recommendations to the finance committee, and then the finance committee getting up to speed and looking at them, and eventually to have a recommendation from R&I and finance for the project recommendations and the potential funding sources. That can be a timely or time-consuming process, and it's something that could stretch out over a great deal of time. The way things are moving and the way that we need to respond to PG&E and our ability to make some of those identifications really can be helped by having an ad hoc committee that would serve the purpose of understanding the review processes that would be going on, that the staff's involved in, and then when it would come back for that recommendation process, that hopefully by the statuses of this ad hoc committee back to the individual committees, they'd have a better idea of what was being represented by the request, what the recommendation represented, and it would speed up the entire process of being able to get this eventually to the review of the board, being brought to the board by the staff, of course, but by having other sets of eyes take a look at things and having recommendations. Now, this doesn't mean to say that what the intent is to take any of the work or action away from staff, but to make ourselves available to staff for activities that we may be able to handle in and offload from them, or to take something a little bit more to detail and come back to staff and say, geez, this is what we found. Excuse me. So that's what the real driver is behind all of it. Does anyone have any questions so far about kind of what I've gone over? Cheryl?
I do, Cindy. Back in 2018, and Bob Greshams worked on a CIP list, and we've gone over this list, and Are you saying we're now going to amend this list, prioritize?
No, and it's not we. I mean, if there's anything to that, there'd be recommendations that the staff, excuse me, that the R&I committee might make to staff or staff might make to them either way. But no, it's a matter of going through and doing the real prioritizations of the work and potentially being able to group things into synergistic projects.
Okay, Melissa did that.
Pardon?
Melissa did that. This is what I want to say. I went through my stuff and Melissa Bland did this exercise back in 2018. And maybe it might behoove all of us to review October 11th, 2018 report from Melissa Bland.
Well, since Melissa's on staff, I think that she's well aware of it, and I'm sure that her manager, Ray Denzo, is well aware of that also. I'm sorry, Pam, you've got something you'd like to interject to the process.
Maybe I just wanted to clarify for Cheryl. So we're not talking about revising the whole entire CIP list. What the discussion is focusing on just the PG&E IGA projects.
Okay.
And those are called out on the CIP list as ECMs. You'll see those on there through wastewater. Okay. But if you recall, we don't have any of those ECMs in water or administration because our project has kind of expanded to look at the district as a whole. So the focus of the ad hoc is to review all the ECM projects with PG&E and decide if they should be implemented like in groups together. Can we get grants for those groups? So the focus isn't on that CIP list that's in place. It's more just the PG&E projects.
Okay, thank you.
That are being focused on it. If that helps
it does.
Kind of explain why we're meeting.
Okay, it clarifies. Because I couldn't imagine that this would be redundant to what has been.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right, and if you recall too, the only PG&E projects that we've memorialized in the budget are related to wastewater. So if R&I and the board and everybody decides to move forward with some general fund like improvements at the vets hall or some of like LED lights on some of our street lights and any kind of efficiencies that's not sitting in wastewater, we would need to have those discussions and, see those budgetary impacts of those projects, to be able to move forward.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam, for the clarifications. Sorry, Cheryl, I guess I didn't
I just didn't understand.
Emphasize enough at the beginning that it was related specific to the IGA process.
Yeah, thank you.
Also, we didn't take public comment. Should you have taken public comment?
Thank you.
And Ted has his hand up.
I appreciate that. And Ted has his hand up also. Yes, Ted.
I was going to say, first thing to understand is that ECM stands for Energy Conservation Measure, which that kind of gets lost in the all of the jargon. So that's what PG&E's focus is. The second thing I'll say is that if you go back to the meeting of the Resource and Infrastructure Committee, their last special meeting, and view the replay of that, you get a lot more data about what this is all about. Dave Pearson mapped the CIP list into the ECMs, but what we have to realize is that PG&E's design work is a different take on how you build out the CIP list. And so while in wastewater you can map the CIPs into the ECMs, they don't necessarily go in the same order because there are things that are going to work together. For instance, replacing the transformer and the backup generators at the same time would be an ECM module that's different when you look on the CIP list because they're standalone projects. And so it's going through the thought process of what the R&I committee was discussing is very helpful in trying to understand how this project is supposed to be coming together.
Thank you, Ted. Haley, I was remiss in not asking for public comment when we first began for public comment related to the agenda item. Do we have any public comments?
We do not have any public comments at this time.
Thank you. All right. So to go back to the discussion, the underlying thought behind an ad hoc committee that shared staff from the two committees is to understand, have the chance for members of the committees to understand how the staff is making its decisions relative to the prioritization and the review and grouping into possible projects, and also to be able to review the timeline in terms of status and the urgency and the limitations that staff judgment has for kind of the outward edge of where we should be in being able to get these things done. For instance, if something has the potential of either failing or being in jeopardy in a 3-year period, then that enters into the considerations of the prioritizations and things that would be being made. Working through that and having made the decisions on what things to go forward with also requires the financing either by grants or loans. And so that can be almost a parallel activity that's going on in terms of being able to understand the resources that are available and what we might be eligible for. And so that's part of the process that would happen as well. Ted, your hand went up first.
You just mentioned two things that sort of come together, I think. Timeline and loans. It's my guess that we would be unable to get any kind of a loan until we have our audits complete. And so I think one of the things that we probably need to have clarified is how does the timeline for moving forward with this project match up with the timeline for doing the audits? And you know, grants may be difficult if we're in an unaudited status too. So you know, I think that's an important thing for us to consider.
Thank you, Ted. John or Pam, are you in a position to be able to address that at this point, or is that something we just need to take under consideration?
Yeah, so we're moving out on a next audit, and I think we're focused to get that done by September timeframe right now.
Okay.
But I was just going to also, if I may, tag on to something Ted talked about, the relationship between all these dynamics for executing these ECMs. So we have a priority on the CIP list that just is a logical progression of what we'd like to do first and second. The ECM process blows all that up, and I'll explain what I mean by that. First of all, we have no money for any of those really, with the exception of the new transformer and the switchboard. We did put those in the budget because beyond everything else, we need those two items first and foremost, because it has nothing to do with energy conservation. It has everything to do with, we're blowing up a motor about every 2 months because of an ungrounded system. So we're going to save money over the long term just by replacement of those two components. But there's, in addition to energy conservation, the engineering team that has been in there looking at everything from energy conservation opportunities to the overall process, meaning how do we process our wastewater? Where does it go from the time it comes into the plant? How does it route its way through? We are examining from top to bottom that entire system. So there are efficiencies to be gained by rerouting things, piping systems, utilizing those tanks for a different reason other than for sludge, etc. So, but in my mind, at the end of the day, it comes down to money. Now, unfortunately for wastewater, there are virtually no grants left in the system. All the grant money is largely on the water side. That doesn't mean there aren't any, but we're going to have to be creative and when we look at that. And so we have $17 million in ECMs alone. That doesn't count everything else on the CIP list. It's a big number, but remember, we passed this rate increase for a long-term period. So those rate increases over time allow us to do a lot of these things. We've already started looking at other options besides loans and grants. There are investment groups that are now standing up for a variety of reasons, addressing the municipal government side of things. So they're getting pretty creative on how they finance projects like ours, and some of them do it without any increase or fees in the calculation. So there's a lot to look at, and certainly those with finance backgrounds will be great to have on the team as we look at those. I consider most of this operational and oriented, but at its core, they're strategic issues because for the here and now, we have to repair what we have and make operational for the next 10 to 15, 20 years until there comes a time where we build a potential next plant. So I think very strategically way out 20, 30 years. So we got to fix what we got now while looking forward. You know, is that a regional plant? These are all questions for the board and for the committees, you know, to think about. But at any rate, getting a little beyond the original question, but hopefully that helps, you know, add on to Ted's initial comment there.
Okay, thank you, John. And Dwayne, a while back you had your hand up, and I apologize, it's taken time to get to you.
Yes, I think back to the time when we went out to the wastewater treatment plant as a committee, and we were given a tour and a presentation by staff at that time, and the list of priorities that went along with what they were trying to do. At that time, they were looking at about $8 million worth of replacements or repairs, of which they said about $4 million was just absolutely necessary in order to keep the plant moving on. But also I remember in that presentation too that they stated that PG&E would offer something that we needed pretty desperately because of our inability to process or collateralize any type of large loans at this time. PG&E would assist with low interest or zero interest loan procurement, as well as finding, grant money available if possible, that they would work hand in hand with us on that. So it's grown a lot, since that time that we toured the plant, and there's a lot more pieces to the puzzle, you might say, but it's, everything looks like it's going well, and we've got a good opportunity here to fix a lot of problems that have been ongoing for a long time. And I just wanted to throw that out. If everybody remembers our tour and actually getting to see and talk to staff about, what needs to be done critically now, but, incorporating a lot of this other stuff in with it while we're doing that also makes sense.
Thank you, and I do appreciate that, and that is something that is maybe there are members of the staff themselves that have had conversations with PG&E that might be able to provide more insight to that. I directly have not had those kinds of conversations. I had attended an initial kickoff meeting, and PG&E did bring a finance manager as well as members of his staff to that meeting. And I do know that we have access and resource points there that I'm sure staff members have been in contact with, but we do need to pursue the idea that was offered up from PG&E that they could be a resource for that.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions or discussions that folks may have? Marvin, haven't heard anything from your end. Anything that
no,
you?
I'm just listening.
Okay, just wanted to make sure you heard us.
I'm still awake.
Had no doubt. Okay. Well, that being the case then, and unless there's something specifically in addition that anyone would like to talk to, I guess I'd like to ask if there are any volunteers or any individuals who would like to participate as one of two members. Well, Ted and Dwayne, put your hands up immediately. And Marvin, I apologize, I can't see your hand, so I don't know whether that was something you wanted to jump into or not. I want to touch base with you too.
No, I'm happy being on the sidelines on this one.
All right. Oh, excellent. Well, all right. Then we have the two individuals who will participate from the finance.
I had my hand up, Cindy, but that's okay.
Excuse me, Cheryl?
I had my hand up, but that's okay. That's okay. I had my hand up for it, but it'd be a challenge, to say the least. But so be it.
Okay. Well, I apologize. We can have the three and take a vote on the committee if you'd like us to.
No, that's okay. I'll back it. That's fine.
So Dwayne and Ted, thank you very much for offering to participate in things. I think that both of you will make an excellent addition to what's going on. The two committee members from R&I, as I had mentioned, I think in
Can I ask a question?
my communication earlier, were Karen Dean and Tom Gray. So I think the committee to be able to support the staff in this process. So I'm very pleased for all of us.
Can I ask a question?
I concur.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
So are there reserves being put away toward the manholes and the Stewart Street tank and things that, that need to, are there reserves being put away toward these projects? Or are they just being, are the reserves being put away? I guess I should ask that question. I don't know.
Ms. Duffield, would you,
Sure. So in wastewater, if you recall during the budget process, we were hoping to end the year with a surplus.
Yes.
And that was going to be rolled forward to balance the deficit projected that we budgeted for 2021. And then in the water fund, there was a large surplus that has yet to been identified going forward into 2021, because they were waiting for this IGA stuff to settle out and determine what may be needed in the water fund. So there's not specific reserves for what you were requesting, like the manhole replacement. The manhole replacement's just a component of the annual maintenance that's done. It's not a capital project. So there wasn't a reserve set aside for that. And as far as the other large water projects, they're still being defined.
Yeah, and I know that there's been talk about other things that need to be done in town too. So I was just curious. Thank you.
well, and until we actually get to the end of our fiscal year, we won't know what our final position is either in terms of considering things for reserves.
I just didn't know if things were getting earmarked or not. Okay, thank you.
Mary?
Do we need a nomination kind of thing or voting on that, or is that just for the committee?
Yes, you need a vote.
Yes, we need a vote.
So I'll
So I'd like to entertain a motion.
okay, so I'll move to nominate Ted and Dwayne for the committee.
Second.
I have a nomination or a motion and a second. And Haley, would you please, oh no, Haley will not take a roll call. Got to switch gears here. Would the committee members signify by raising their hand in support? And Marvin, up
Aye.
or down? Thank you.
Aye, up.
Up. All right, so the motion is passed with a vote of 5-0. All right.
Have a nice 4th.
Yep. Any other actions? Any suggestions as far as future business items that you would like to voice as we have the opportunity? All right. With that being said, I will call the meeting adjourned then, and thank you all very much for the quick turnaround and support on that, so we'll be able to feed this information back. Have a good 4th, safe 4th.
Very good.
Yeah.
Happy
Take
4th.
care all.
Okay, bye.